Hi, everybody. All right, so we're going to continue our discussion about thinking in learning target number 1, and we've already talked about forming concepts and solving problems. Now we want to talk about thinking that involves more higher order mental processes. Those higher order mental processes are reasoning and decision making, critical thinking, and creative thinking. All right, so let's start with reasoning. When we're talking about reasoning, we're talking about our ability to be able to transform information to reach conclusions, basically. We're going to weigh arguments, apply rules of logic to come up with some sort of sound conclusion. All right? Now, do realize that reasoning is tied very closely to critical thinking, so you want to put that down in your notes as well. So there are two different types that you're going to need to know of reasoning. There's inductive reasoning and there's deductive reasoning. All right? When it comes to inductive reasoning, you can kind of think of it as like bottom-up processing you want to put down in your notes, okay? Remember when we were talking about bottom-up processing. So how inductive reasoning is like bottom-up processing is that what's going to happen is you're going to start with some incoming information and then you're going to draw conclusions about it. Now, the incoming information with inductive reasoning is going to be specific information, and then you are going to draw conclusions to a general population, if you will, or something like that. Let me give you an example, okay? So let's say, for example, you meet a person, okay? And this person, you find out, is from Wisconsin, and they're a Packer fan. You may reason then that all people from Wisconsin are Packer fans because of this experience, okay? This would be an example of inductive reasoning. You're going from this specific person and you're applying what you've learned and make conclusions about all people from Wisconsin. Okay? We do this all the time, right? Oh, well, you're from such and such place? Well, I know somebody from there. Do you do this? Okay? Right? Okay, deductive reasoning is going to be the exact opposite. We're going to go from a general case that's known to be true, and we're going to apply it to specific cases. All right? So, if we know that generally most people from Wisconsin tend to be Packer fans, then when we meet somebody and we find out that they're from Wisconsin, we would assume that that individual, here's the specific, would be a Packer fan. Okay? And we do this, again, all the time. This is how we reason. All right? We do it inductively and we do it deductively, and the point of it is to reach some sort of a conclusion about something. Okay? All right, let's move on then to decision making. Now, decision making, first of all, is different than reasoning, okay? Reasoning involves much more established rules, like inductive and deductive reasoning, okay? Those are rules. We go from specific to general or from general to specific, right? But with decision making, there's no rules that exist for it. Okay? We don't know what the consequence of our decision is. We can't predict the freaking future. Like, that's what's happening here. And it becomes a very, very difficult type of thinking because we wish that we had that piece to the puzzle because that would make the decision so much easier. All right? So I want you to think really quick about all the decisions that you have to make. Think about the large and the small ones. Should you major in biology or psychology? Should you go to college at all? Should you go to graduate school if you do go to college? Should you get a job right out of high school? And then, should you establish yourself in your career first before you get married? Or should you get married and then work on establishing yourself in your career? Should you have kids? I mean, there are so many choices to make in life, okay? So decision making involves us evaluating lots of different paths, if you will, or alternatives, and then choosing among them, but not having all the pieces to the puzzle. So, what psychologists have discovered is we have two systems to be able to make decisions. We have an automatic system and we have a controlled system. An automatic system is going to be a very intuitive, rapid, quick system that we use to make a decision. We don't think very long about it. We almost just react as far as decision making goes. Now, oftentimes, this is a shortcut that we make. Now, the shortcut it seems like it would be a bad thing, okay? But there's been a lot of research on this, and specifically research done by Malcolm Gladwell. And he wrote a book called Blink If You're Interested. And I've talked about this before. 90% of the time, our automatic system is accurate, okay? Even though it's quicker, and even though it seems like it's a shortcut, it's accurate 90% of the time. Like, we would think a controlled system where it's slow, it's effortful, we think long and hard, and we analyze all the possibilities before we make the decision, that is going to make a better decision. But Gladwell argues no, that automatic gut reaction or our hunch is more accurate than our controlled process or our controlled system. It's very interesting. You think about you trying to decide maybe what you want to do after high school. And I tell students that when they ask me, they say something to me like, I just don't know what institution I want to go to. And I say, you need to pay attention to this system right here. Your very quick response that you have to when you open up that letter in the mail and they say that you're accepted or that you're not accepted. You're going to know how you truly feel and what the right decision is to make. But you have to pay attention to it because it happens so fast. If you don't pay attention to it, your head starts taking over, and you can be talked out of that instant gut reaction. All right. There's a problem, though. If 90% of the time your automatic system is right, that leaves for a 10% deficit. All right, and that's where mistakes can be made in decision making. So, heuristics can lead to biases and outright errors, and you need to know these for the exam. All right, the first one is a confirmation bias, and this is where when we're trying to make a decision, we're only going to weigh and listen to things that support our ideas, and we're not going to listen to the other side of things. And that can create a skewed conclusion, if you will, and make our decision making ineffective and entirely wrong because we didn't listen to both sides of something. We only listen to the things that support our ideas, which makes us confirm our own bias about what we want the decision to be anyways. Second mistake that we make is this thing called hindsight bias. And we tend to think that we accurately predicted an outcome of something after it's already said and done and played out, okay? Can you say the Pete Carroll incident, all right? Think about this. How many people said, oh my gosh, I knew as soon as they passed that ball that they weren't going to make that touchdown. How could have he decided to use a passing play instead of a running play when you only have, 2 yards or something like that to go? That's why Seattle lost the Super Bowl. He should have known, he should have ran in that instance. Well, it's easy to say that now that it's all said and done. If the touchdown is made from a passing play, nobody talks about this at all, okay? So looking back, hindsight is always 20/20. Yes, I'm sure you've heard of that before. This is what we call hindsight bias, all right? Okay. Another mistake that we make in decision making is this thing called the availability heuristic. Okay? And this is where we are going to make a prediction about the probability of something happening to us or to somebody else based on how easy it is for us to recall or imagine certain events that we think could happen. All right? So, for example, it's much more likely for somebody to die in a car crash than it is in a plane crash, but plane crashes are what are put on TV all the time. There's an ease of recalling or imagining that similar event, and so we think about this, that the probability of it happening is much higher than something else because we're exposed to the planes crashing much more often. Likewise, this little thing I found on Pinterest. When Mrs. Bosch watches her Criminal Minds episodes all the time, it's very easy for me to recall or imagine a serial killer in my house because of that when I hear a noise in the dark after watching a horror movie. All right. Another thing, the base rate fallacy. This one, and there's just been a change to the name of this one, so you might want to write this down in your notes super quick. They're calling this one base rate neglect now. And you might see in both ways. Who knows what will show up on the AP exam. All right, anyways, this is where we're going to ignore information about general principles in favor of very specific, vivid information. For example, you might read in Consumer Reports that there's like this TV that, I don't know, it's some Sony TV, 70 inches, whatever, and like it has a super high Consumer Reports rating. Like everybody who seems to get this TV loves it. It's like 5 stars, right? However, you go to lunch with your friend and you tell her about how you're going to buy this Sony TV, and she's like, oh my God, you can't buy that TV. We got the same TV and it blew up and it was the biggest piece of junk we've ever had. And you're like, oh yeah, well this one very specific event must override the general principles that everybody is saying about that TV. And so then you don't get the TV because of this very vivid information in your mind. That's a shortcut that we make in decision making. All right, and the last shortcut that we make, I've already talked several times about how us stereotyping people is a shortcut that we make in our thinking. We have a tendency to make judgments about group membership based on physical appearance. This is what we call a representative heuristic, okay? Basically where we look at somebody and we judge them based on their physical appearances. We would believe here, for example, that these gentlemen, there's no way that they could be engineers or doctors because they dress like this, okay? All right. So, heuristics do help us to make decisions very rapidly, but we might not always make the best decisions. And sometimes what we need to do to override that is to think more critically and creatively, which is what I'm going to talk about here very quickly. You may pause me right now and go take your Edmodo quiz, learning target number 1, thinking, using your notes. It's 10 questions. Or you may continue watching me and go to Edmodo after we're done talking about creativity and critical thinking. Alright, so learning target number 2, talking about the characteristics of creative thought and creative thinkers. How do we think creatively? First of all, let's talk about what is creative thinking. Creative thinking is thinking about something in a novel and unusual way, and then you're trying to think of some sort of never been done before solutions to the problems, or maybe even unconventional ways. Now, for you to think creatively, it requires you to be flexible and playful in your thinking. There's been a whole bunch of research on how important humor is into the creative process, especially as opposed to people being angry or mad when they're trying to think creatively. And humor, quote unquote, seems to grease the wheels of creativity. Alright, we also have to have inner motivation to think creatively. Extrinsic motivation, like rewards and punishments, aren't going to be very effective in getting people to think creatively. Whereas if you want to because you think it's important and you don't need a reward or punishment, that's inner motivation. You have to be willing to face risk. You have to be willing to put yourself out there, look weird, look dumb, make mistakes, get messy. If you're not willing to do that, it's going to be hard for you to be a creative thinker. And also you have to be open to feedback from other people. Let people be objective and evaluate your work. If you can't handle that type of judgment, it's going to be really hard for you to be a creative thinker as well. Now, there's 2 types of creative thinking. There's divergent thinking and convergent thinking. And convergent thinking is where people are able to narrow down the single best solution to a problem. Okay? They're able to think about it in many different ways and know what the single best answer is. Now, divergent thinking is where we brainstorm and we think of lots of solutions to the problem, but we may have a hard time narrowing down that solution. Okay? Divergent thinking is really important in the world because there's so many instances where there really isn't a single best solution to a problem, or it would require multiple solutions to actually fix the one problem. So divergent thinking seems to be the more superior creative type of thinking. All right, and then how do we think critically? Well, critical thinking is going to be very vital to problem solving. We're going to be using it for reasoning. But what we do with critical thinking is we tend to reflect on things and we tend to evaluate things and make some sort of judgment about it. When we're going to evaluate something or make some sort of judgment about it, we have to be mindful. We have to be mentally alert. Now, Ellen Langer did several studies on people being in the present. Okay, and let me read you that study really quick. She found that people, as many as 90%, would mindlessly give up their place in line for a copy machine when someone asked, "Can I go first? I need to make copies." As compared to when the same person said, "Can I go first?" Just 60% of the people let them do that. Now, this blows my mind, but it makes a lot of sense. Like, you're standing in line to make copies. Are you really in the present? Are you really like thinking about what's going on around you? Are you thinking about what you have to do next and that sort of thing? So the fact that somebody says, "Can I go first? I need to make copies," like, duh, we're all standing in line to make copies, but you just mindlessly let them go in front of you. So the point here is that for us to be able to evaluate things and to think reflectively about things, we really need to be in the present. And not distracted by things that we need to do in the future or things that happened in the past. Likewise, we also have to be very open-minded. We have to be open to looking at other ways to do things and to think about things. I have a little visual here for you that I found on Pinterest, okay? But it's so true. We tend to be less susceptible to biases when our mind is open, and we tend to be better critical thinkers when that happens. It's very difficult to be open-minded. It's much more easy to be closed-minded, of course. It also exposes us, because when we're critical thinking, we have to have courage. We have to, we're going to make some sort of assumptions, and we might find that our assumptions are wrong, but they're going to be evaluated by somebody else potentially, and we just have to be courageous enough to be able to share those thoughts as well. So, these are the ways that we critically think and creatively think. So, I have a question for you and something for you to critically think about. Does school help create creative and critical thinkers? What do you think? Based on what you know about creativity and critical thinkers, do we foster this type of thinking or do we stifle it? So I want you to respond to this on Edmodo in the text box after you click Turn In underneath the Creative and Critical Thinking assignment. All right, that is it for me right now. Get ready to live tomorrow with intelligence.